love to introduce tonight's presenter a bit more. Dr. Kathy is a licensed psychologist who specializes in working with those in ministry. She has over 25 years of experience as a therapist, university professor, consultant, and workshop presenter, including for our CVN member programs, as Katie mentioned. And I've also seen Dr. Kathy's commitment to justice locally, her partnership with our parish and Immigration Support Network here in Silver Spring, Maryland. And across these contexts, Dr. Kathy, I think you just bring a great sense of hope and faith without losing sight of the complexities that come with building community and solidarity and spirituality across difference. So when we thought of who could help us through this particularly challenging time, you were top of mind, and we are so grateful for you, and thank you for sharing your wisdom and presence with our community tonight.
Oh, thank you so much, Katie. And I really want to thank your staff for your quick responsiveness. I think one of the things that is hard to wrap my head around, and I'm sure for all of those listening at wherever you are, same thing, like in my family, we jokingly talk about the before times. Like 2 weeks ago, things were very, very different. And now there's such a feeling of, what do we do? And this is so unexpected. And so I just think it's really important to say, this is all of us trying to respond as best we can. So we're hoping that tonight's presentation meets your needs, but we also welcome you to let us know what other kinds of things would be helpful.
Thanks, Dr. Kathy. And with that, I'm going to leave it to you.
Okay, great. All right, so my friends, my idea for tonight is to try to give you an overview about how do we do self-care in such uncertain times. And I'm going to see if my tech works. Okay, so I'm calling this the new abnormal. Right now, we're living in times where this crisis was mostly unexpected. It's certainly unprecedented in my lifetime and the lifetime of my parents. There isn't something to compare this to in terms of the scope, at least in the domestic scene in the United States, of the kind of change to our day-to-day life, new restrictions, new cautions, and dealing with this global pandemic. I know that many of you who are listening throughout the world may have some other points of reference where similar upheaval has happened. And in some ways, this may be helpful to you in terms of guiding you through. But by and large, I would say for most of us, this feels unpredictable. Here in Maryland, 2 weeks ago, they're like, we're going to ask everybody to stay home for 2 weeks. And now we're hearing like maybe 2 months. And now we're hearing maybe over the summer. Like there's just this sense of we really don't have the information right now about what the future is going to look like. And so in times where you have unexpected, unprecedented, and unpredictable things happening, you know, it's a pretty normal thing to deal with a lot of feelings. So I want to talk a little bit about like, what are some normal ways to feel right now? This is from my friends at Conterra that do a lot of work with resilience. It's perfectly normal right now if you're finding that you're feeling more anxious, more worried, more restless, more tense than you normally do. It's really normal if you are not able to focus, if you're easily distracted and you can't concentrate like you used to. A lot of people I've been talking to are saying, like, even when I have downtime, I just don't feel like I can settle down. That's really normal. I'm going to tell you why in a minute. It's really normal that you might be feeling this kind of high alert, gotta do something, overdrive kind of energy, even if literally you have nothing to do, which I know, unfortunately, for many of you, you signed up for a service here that's been pretty disrupted. Now, I'm aware that some of you are still out there in very high needs areas. And for you, probably the alertness is the sense of like, we got to deal with this in a proactive way. Many people are reporting difficulty with sleeping, and that's because when our sense of threat is high, it's hard to rest and close your eyes. Irritability, anger, impatience. A lot of people are feeling kind of frayed at the edges. If you feel like you're on an emotional roller coaster, one day you're like, we're going to be fine. And the next day, we're going to die. that's actually kind of normal. Our feelings are rapidly changing based on the changing picture of what's happening. And I know a lot of people have told me they're just feeling like, ugh, I just can't even. So they're diving into Netflix or rolling into bed and just not wanting to get up and not wanting to face the day. That's okay. I mean, it's not where you want to stay, but it's a pretty normal response to these abnormal times. So if you're having these kinds of experiences, fatigue, anger, irritation, having a hard time motivating yourself, just know there's nothing wrong with you. It's your body having a normal response in an unusual time. The other thing is that for a lot of us, we're like, all right, enough already with the outbreak. I want to focus on something else. But as soon as we turn to something else, we're like, oh, let me check the news one more time about that. It's hard to take our attention off of it. And you might find yourself doing the Google Master thing where you're trying to read everything you can about the pandemic and finding yourself overwhelmed by it. So I want to talk a little bit about why this is. Our bodies and our minds were developed with certain core things that help us feel stable and safe. We need safety, we need connection, and we need a sense of satisfaction. Those are kind of the core needs that human beings have. And when these are met, when we're safe, we're connected, we're satisfied, we feel peace, we feel a sense of love for others, we tend to feel a sense of contentment. When these needs are not being met, we tend to feel fear, anxiety, and anger instead of peace. We tend to feel isolation and loneliness instead of love. And we tend to feel a kind of frustrated, dissatisfied, or bored feeling in place of contentment. I'm sure many of you can relate to feeling one or more of these things on the right-hand side of the screen. So I want to talk a little bit about how our brain evolved. We have in our brain, in the primitive parts of our brain, so not our thinking cortex, but down in the limbic system, which they call the reptile brain, we have some very primitive things that were designed to help us to survive. We have an alarm system and we have a rest system, and both of them are useful. So our alarm system is reactive to threat. If you see a saber-toothed tiger heading toward you and you're like, I just need another minute with this beautiful flower, you're going to be lunch. So if our ancestors survived, they survived because they saw that tiger. They didn't think, they didn't try to figure out a plan, they just ran. And so this part of our brain is characterized as a non-thinking, reactive part of our brain. Hey, there's a tiger, you better run. That's the sympathetic nervous system. It's really good for responding to immediate threats. And when you think about our evolutionary ancestors, really their threat range was as far as they could see. That was it. There was no internet. So they didn't have news from other countries coming to them as threat, right? So it's good for responding to immediate threat because our midbrain sends this alarm and then it dumps adrenaline and cortisol into our system. And what that does is it numbs pain and it lets us fight, it lets us flee, or it lets us freeze up, right? So the adrenaline really gives us this added burst of energy. It mobilizes our resources, hopefully until the threat is gone. But it also, just by the by, that reaction suppresses our immune system. So that's important for us to know. It's why if you were in college and everybody you knew used to get sick the day after finals were over, this is why. Because that stress system tends to deplete us in terms of our immune system. We also have a rest system. This is the parasympathetic nervous system. And this is like, no more tigers. I can relax. And I can think, I can plan ahead, I can restore myself. Our immune system starts functioning normally again. So this parasympathetic nervous system is just what restores us into balance. And then we feel that capacity for peace, for contentment, for love toward others. So this is evolutionarily, but think about the current pandemic. What if there are 678,000 tigers, and what if they're running toward you quickly, and what if they're multiplying as they come, and they keep coming for months, and they're invisible, that kind of long-term panicky response. Think about how different this threat of virus is from anything our ancestors experienced. We have international news, we see it coming, we know the scope of it, but all of this just activates our alarm system. It gives us some information to prepare ourselves for what to do, but mostly it is activating such a prolonged stress response that we were not really designed for that. So what I'm saying is that our normal reactions of like, I can't think straight, I can't rest even when I'm resting, that's because as far as our brain is concerned, the tigers are still coming. So we have to really use the thinking part of our brain to say like, okay, I get what this reaction is, but I think it's really important for us in this time to be very proactive about trying to work with our mind and body so that we can allow this alarm system to move back into a state of rest when it's appropriate. So how do we cope? I'm glad you asked. There are 4 cornerstones of resilience. This is from the people at Conterra. Taking care of our physical and emotional health. Sorry, I should explain resilience. Resilience is the ability of people to endure stress and trauma and then bounce back afterwards. So the 4 cornerstones of people being able to bounce back after a period of prolonged or extreme stress are physical and emotional health, social support, self-efficacy. And self-efficacy is a fancy way of saying feeling like you can do something, that that you have some control. And then meaning and purpose. This is sort of the spiritual backdrop for most of us. So these are the cornerstones that we want to keep our eye on as we navigate this stress to prepare ourselves to get through it without falling into exhaustion or sickness that's not even related to coronavirus, because just we're depleting our immune system. We want to make sure that we're taking care of our physical and emotional health, getting social support, doing the things we can do, and then finding some meaning and purpose. So first, I want to talk about the importance of attending to your body, especially for those of you who have found yourself suddenly at home. Suddenly going from a high structure to no structure is really important to regulate yourself into relatively normal rhythms. My nephew, who's just lost his job because the business had to close, went from having to be at work at a particular time every day to like anytime can be morning time. So he has sort of fallen into the staying up till 3 a.m., getting up around 2 p.m., like that kind of getting off rhythm. And you can kind of see him drifting a little bit through this. Really important, our bodies function better when we're attuned to natural day and night cycles. Is really important for us to get enough sleep, which means allowing our body to get into a restful state and then sleep. We'll talk more about that. Many of you know this, but these blue screens that we have, the computer, the iPhone, they emit a kind of light that tends to wake our brain up. And so it's really important for an hour or so before bed to discontinue use of screens. It'll help you sleep better. Important to pay attention to nutrition. I know that that's going to vary widely depending on the availability of healthy and nutritious food where you are, but do your best. Do your best to keep a good rhythm of good food, good sleep, and exercise. I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about this, but exercise is super important because tension builds up in our body and then it makes us feel unwell, makes us feel irritable and stressed. So really important. One of the things I strongly recommend, I'm not trying to sound like some kind of personal trainer, but if you can get yourself to do 20 minutes of cardiovascular exercise 5 times a week, most people report a dramatic drop in their anxiety as a result. And typically it works quite well for people first thing in the morning. It can also work after the end of the day, but some people find that cardiovascular activity at night keeps them awake. So figure out what works for you. But the point is, in the resource guide that we'll send you later, there's lots of people live streaming home workouts and yoga. And, so even though the gyms are closed, there are things you might be able to do. And especially if you're finding yourself kind of hunkering down and getting immobilized, getting your body moving can really help with that. Also, it's important for us to relax tension in our body. So one of my recommendations is every hour or so, take a second and kind of check your body like, where am I? Take 3 deep breaths, consciously checking your body, checking your shoulders and neck, checking your abdomen, checking your legs, and just release the tension that you can release. Thirdly, there are wonderful body scan resources available on YouTube, and they come out of the mindfulness-based stress reduction movement. They can be extremely helpful in letting you do a really comprehensive body scan once or twice a day. And that's kind of the cornerstone of this mindfulness approach, is 30 minutes once or twice a day. You really just go through the entirety of your body. And even though you're supposed to non-judgmentally be aware of it, the truth is, if you notice you're super tense, you can always go like, okay, maybe I'll just let that tension go, because we're often unaware of the tension that we're holding. Also, it's really true if you're teleworking or if you're working more on your computer than you used to, your body is probably more confined than it was when you were working in person. So just be really attentive to that. Exercise, nutrition, sleep, but reduce the tension in your body, because that is a core signal that we get that we are not well, is that feeling of like, I might have to run any second now. So if you don't need to, you can relax that tension in your body. The other way that we can really work with our body system is by our breathing. And so this is a really effective method that can work in a variety of situations. But the exhalation is an important signal to our brain that we are not being chased by a tiger and that we can stop and relax. It's that kind of cartoon, phew. That exhale is our body's way of saying the danger's over. So you can do this for yourself. I'm going to teach you just a really simple breathing trick, and I would invite you to try it with me. Now, I want to say this, the suggestion I'm going to make about the number of counts you hold your breath for, leave it to your own experience. Like, you're not supposed to feel like I can't breathe, so just make it comfortable. But what I want you to do is first take a deep inhalation, maybe for 4 counts, fill your lungs. And then when your lungs are full, hold your breath gently for like 2, 3, 4, 5 counts. And then slowly exhale. And the exhalation is the interesting thing. It's like this. So almost like you're blowing out a birthday candle. You're blowing out the breath and you're prolonging the exhale. So let's try it again. Breathing in, hold, breathe out. Now, I don't know what it was like for you. Try it 2 or 3 times. Don't do it like 20 times. You'll get a little lightheaded. But when I do this, I can actually feel like the tension in my neck and shoulders kind of melting away. It's a profound way that we switch our body's signal from you're in danger, like, I'm okay. And so we're restoring that sense of safety, and it can really make a big difference in our body just to do that when you notice you're holding tension. Just do that when you notice that you are stressed out. Paying attention to your breath in this way is a really short version of like, I can relax now. So that's the body. We talked about regulating it, good food, good sleep, letting go of tension, and working with your breathing. So that's the body. Now let's talk about the mind. Our mind is interpreting and receiving these threats all the time. And normally, if people are stressed out because of their thinking, a therapist like me would be like, but isn't that a little bit of a worst case scenario? Aren't you catastrophizing a little bit? Well, it doesn't ask you to not catastrophize if there is a catastrophe happening. And in my own lifetime, I would have to say this qualifies. So we need some other techniques, because the idea of like, well, what's the worst case scenario? And is that realistic? We're actually finding out that we've underestimated the risk. And one of the things I want to just briefly jump to the side here and say is anxiety is good for us in moderation. When a tiger is coming, it is really good to be anxious about that. It's just not good to be anxious all the time, everywhere, when the tigers are gone. So in this crisis, you, of course, probably have met some people who have minimized the crisis, who may have continued to act in ways that aren't very self-protective, saying like, everybody's blowing this out of proportion. They may not be anxious enough, and as a result, bringing risk either to themselves or the people around them. So when we're working with our mind, the idea is not to bring our anxiety to zero, it's to keep it in an appropriate and manageable amount. So I want to talk a little bit about that. Oh, I just did. First, follow the guidelines that are being given to you about safe hand washing, safe practices, social distancing. Like, do follow those, because those are ways of ensuring your own health. And don't take undue risks. I'm aware there are some of you who are out there who are healthcare professionals still going into high risk vectors. And first, I just want to say thank you so much. Like, the work that you're doing is heroic and it's beautiful. So thank you for that. It's really important for you to be able to take the steps that you can take to follow the practices that seem safe to you. And as a volunteer, I also want to just say to you, ultimately, in the end, I really encourage you to be in good communication with your program. If you're not feeling safe, if you're not feeling like your needs are being well cared for, it's important for you to just take whatever precautions are available to you. Also, attending to the mind, I want to say we need to manage our exposure to threat messages. Every time we get a Yahoo Mail update, oh, you probably don't use Yahoo Mail, a Google update about new coronavirus information, our brain receives it as a threat. And so we need to really curate and really winnow down, like, what is the appropriate amount of news that I should get and what is just too darn much for me. Because if we are overexposing ourselves to threat messages, we are going to make ourselves sick with worry. And we don't want to do that. So don't overwhelm yourself. Limit yourself to one or two news sources. Really be careful about how much social media stuff you're reading, just so that you can really discern it's the right amount of information without me feeling panicked all the time. One of the ways that you can evaluate it is this news telling me something new? And is it telling me something I can act on? And if it's not, it might be better for me just to move forward and let that go. And this is important for self-efficacy. Take the actions that you can take. So it's important for you to have a reasonable-ish plan. Like, if you might get quarantined, it's useful to see if you've got some food in the house. Like, those are good plans. Planning for 5 what ifs out may not be so helpful because the information is changing so rapidly. Keeping some structure and predictability in your day, even if you don't necessarily have one. So if you are living in community but you don't have a structure now, create one for yourself, because it is taxing on our minds to have to invent every day. What am I going to do now? How about now? How about now? So if we kind of say, like, my exercise time is here, my prayer time's here, I go out for a walk here, I do housework around here, like, if we create kind of a rhythm, it's actually quite helpful for our brains to be able to rest instead of continually making up, what am I going to do next? I also think it's really important for us to change our perspective. So a lot of people have expressed deep frustration with, like, they're telling me not to do anything. Like, I came here to help and now I can't do anything to help. Staying home is not doing nothing. Like, so that's one of the reversals of perspective we're all trying to absorb. Staying home is a really taxing choice that is doing something that helps the community stay safer. There may be concrete actions you can take if you can, in some safe way, help provide for a neighbor who's more vulnerable. That's great. But it's not actually helpful if we go out and just try to make ourselves busy. We may inadvertently make somebody sick because we become a vector for illness. So I'm aware of a situation where somebody went to a healthcare provider to get a healthcare, and was in that healthcare meeting exposed to the virus because her practitioner had it and didn't know it. So the practitioner felt like she was offering healing, but in fact was exposing people to the virus. We just have to be so humble about that and do what we can to see our actions, even if we're not out there active and serving, as having a purpose. We also want to attend to our mind. So paying attention to the worries that circulate, especially if you're prone to anxiety. Rick Hansen has this great 3-step process. First, he says, you just have to observe that it's happening. So, there's all this stuff running through my head. Oh, I'm worrying. So we move from the content to just naming, like noticing, oh, I'm worrying here. So instead of being in the river, we get on the riverbanks. Look at my mind, it's just spinning about this, right? And then the second thing that we can do is not chase it down. Like, just notice that I'm worrying right now. I don't need to think that thought all the way out to the end, because these anxious thoughts are pretty insistent. They want us to think about them, but they're often not producing a new plan, new information, anything we can do about it. And if we find that that's true, that this isn't a useful thought, it's like, what if my mom gets sick? And if she does, if I have a plan for that, what would I do in that circumstance? That's as much as I need to think about it. I don't need to imagine it down to the nth degree. I don't need to worry a lot about it. So if I can recognize that this is not a thought that needs more thinking, then working to let it go. And I love this one Buddhist image of like a leaf dropping in a river. We just let our thought move away. We observe ourselves letting go of it. The other thing you can do, and it's a trick from working with obsessive thinking, is change the channel. Go like, oh, I'm worrying. I don't need to think about this. It's not giving me new information. I'm going to let it go. And now I'm going to think about something else. And you change the channel in your mind. I've literally done this week because my niece told me all about the jellyfish cam that they're running from the Monterey Bay Aquarium. So like when I'm feeling spun up, I will sometimes go to YouTube and just kind of watch the jellyfish for a little while. And it really does change the channel in my mind. So if we can't do it on our own willpower, you can just use a kind of calming distraction. I will say though, I want to caution people against like ODing on Netflix all the time, because I think that actually is like you're just taking the noise of your stress and adding more noise over top of it. So be aware that you might be overloading yourself. But to change the channel to something that calms you, something that makes you laugh, that's a good change the channel. And I also think attending to our mind, working with our mind, we want to have some perspective. So here's a few that I would offer you, and I invite you to practice and work on what's your perspective, because what works for me may or may not work for you. But one perspective for us to keep in mind is that this is a period of time. There was a before and there will be an after. So it's difficult. That does not diminish how challenging and frightening for many of us this time is, but it's not eternal. It has a beginning, it will have an end. It's also really helpful for us to cast our mind back and remember difficulties we've been through successfully before. They may not be quite like this. I've never been self-isolated before. I've never quite had that, but I did live in a very remote place where I didn't know anybody for a long period of time. And I dealt with some of the same kinds of feelings of separation and uncertainty there. So being able to remember like, hey, I did do that and I did it well and I got through the other side, and what did I learn and what helped me? Those things are really useful for us to reactivate in our mind, because they remind us that we are capable, and that self-efficacy piece helps. Another really nice one that has worked for me, I don't know if it'll work for you, but when my mind is just buzzing, like it's just crowded with thinking, I will imagine a lot of space around my brain. So I'll just imagine the vast blue sky, and then somehow the pressure of all of those thoughts in a small space, something about the image of opening the space can create some calm. So really what we're looking for is, what are the perspectives that let you pay enough attention to the anxiety, appropriate anxiety, but don't feed it unnecessarily. Don't keep triggering your alarm system over and over again. How do we take the information that's useful and leave the rest behind, and resist the impulse to try to take in all the information there is, because it will overwhelm us. We also want to use our mind to tap into bigger perspectives that help ground us and remind us of our own capacities. I specifically want to talk about how do you work with worry, because a lot of us are worried about a lot of different things. One really good technique is write it down. Have a little tiny journal that you just, in bullet form, not in paragraph form, bullet form, worrying about this, worrying about that. So just take it from your mind and just give it a place to live. But also you can give it a time frame. So for some people who have a difficulty with worrying a lot throughout the day, I'll often encourage them to create an hour in their day that they can worry. And then the rest of the time, they can be just like, oh, I'm going to write this down. And in my worry time, I can worry about it then. It sounds funny. And it's not that worries won't naturally arise, because they will. Worries are just a feeling attached to a thought. But what it teaches us is I don't have to think them just because they're coming up like this. I can actually put them back down, or I can contain them in some way. So that might be a technique that works for you. My pro tip is don't do this right before bed. That is not a good worry hour at all. The other thing with the worries is analyze them. I think I kind of ran through this in the previous slide, but I want to just run it through here. Does this worry have any new information for you? Does the thing you're worrying about actually apply to you? And can you do anything about it? And if you can, is now the time to act on it? So those 4 questions can be really helpful in discerning whether this is actually content we need to think about. So if the new information is like, oh, there's this new sanitizer that works better than alcohol, and if you use it, then it will help. Like, oh yeah, that could be good. But if it's just like, oh, there might be something that happened in China where people who were testing negative are now testing positive, and that's really confusing to the scientists. Like when I read that article, I was like, oh no, but I have to think, it is new information for me. It doesn't apply to me right now. I can't do anything about it. And so maybe I want to set that particular story down. So working with worry is really important. If you do find the worry has something to tell you, like, what would I do if I got sick? I haven't really thought about that. Well, then make a plan. Like that's a worry that's like good information. It applies to you. You can do something about it. And sure, now when you're not sick is a good time to make a plan. What would happen if you did get sick? Like, how would you handle that? So make a plan, but hold it lightly, because it's important to recognize that plans we make right now really might have to change as new information arises. So don't make a 5-year plan right this second. Might not be the best use of time. The other thing you can do with worry that's really, really helpful, this is a meditation and mindfulness practice from Rick Hansen, and he talks about noticing that you're all right now. So it is true, we have a lot of information about sickness in our community. We have a lot of information about the effects of this virus. But right now, I would just have you notice, are you all right? Like, are you, I hope you all are you free from illness in this moment? Can you speak and hear, and like, do you have a roof over your head? Are you sheltered in some way? And if you are, just don't fail to notice that. I'm really all right now. You know, it's not my dream vacation, but I'm really all right. And that really restores our sense of safety. It brings our attention and focus into the here and now, into my own being. And to say I'm all right now is a real gift. Now, for those of you who may not be all right now, maybe you are sick, or maybe someone you love is sick, I think then we want to work with self-compassion, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. The other positive practice that we can do for times of worry is noticing the good. And so this is not to minimize what's bad, but it is just to balance it out, because our threat brain narrows in on what's wrong and it misses all the things that are right. So Thich Nhat Hanh has this famous example of noticing that you don't have a toothache. All of us out here who don't have toothaches, I'm one of them, are super happy about that, because if you've ever had a toothache, it is miserable. So noticing that right now I don't have a toothache, noticing right now I can see and hear, noticing right now I have enough food to eat, like these are all great things, and savoring that. So that's a beautiful thing for us to be able to do. And that's a practice with our mind that by noticing it, we restore some information to our reptile brain is missing, that we are mostly safe, even though we keep getting these threat messages. So you might a couple times a day scan your body and notice everything that's right now, or notice the environment around you and everything that's right now. These are very powerful practices for expanding the mind out, so we don't ignore the threats, but they're not the only things we're thinking about. So now working with our emotions is also really important. And I think for me, the key trait that we really want to work on right now is acceptance. There's a lot going on, and we have to find a way to say yes to what's going on, including to some unpleasant feelings. So if I'm sad, if I'm scared, if I am angry, being able to just say, I'm all those things. I've been all of those things since, at least twice since breakfast today. Just saying yes and noticing and practicing acceptance for the feelings we have is quite powerful. Because if I'm scared and I'm like, no, you shouldn't be scared, you shouldn't be feeling this way, that tension actually makes it really hard to settle down. But if I can say, yes, I do feel that, and yes, I wish I didn't, it can relax. Tara Brach has some excellent guided meditations on this. One is called Welcoming the Guest. So the idea is just to be able to say yes to whatever you're feeling, including, I don't like feeling like this. Yes. So yes, I'm scared. Yes, I feel powerless and mad. And yeah, I don't like that. Yes. That yes can really soften those emotions really powerfully. Mary Morawski, who's in the centering prayer tradition, developed the welcome prayer. And you can look this up and I'll send that as one of the links. But it's being willing in a spiritual light to welcome every feeling we have. So we say, welcome fear. We don't say welcome pandemic. We don't say welcome cancer. We don't welcome the unfortunate events, but we welcome what we feel and we make space in our heart for it. And then we work to surrender our desires to change or control that. So I surrender and I let go. I acknowledge I am this way, I feel this way, and then I just surrender and I let go. The other thing I find really powerful in this time is working with self-compassion. Many of us are quite naturally compassionate with people around us, but the way we talk to ourselves is not very nice at all. So it's being willing to attend to the feelings within us with the same care we would with a friend. So it has 3 steps. The first is noticing, and you might notice all of these things I'm telling you about really require that we pause and take stock of noticing ourselves. And that alone gets us out of the fighting, flighting thing, which is very reactive, and we observe ourselves. So first, you know what? This is a really difficult moment. I was here to volunteer. I have to stay home. Yeah, this is a really difficult moment. Maybe you're feeling isolated. Oh, this isolation is really hard for me. It's hard for me to be miles from people I love. This is a hard moment. The second is comforting yourself like you would a friend. Oh, so sorry you're going through this. Wow, that's tough. May you feel okay. May you have the strength you need to get through this. What we don't do is we don't say, it's no big deal. Nah, people have it worse than you. Don't do that. It's really about being as kind and supportive to yourself as you would to somebody else. And if you're not sure how to do this, then imagine what your best, most supportive friend might say to you, or the most supportive spiritual figure you've ever had. What would they say? How would they comfort you? And then practice saying that to yourself. This is especially powerful if you're in a situation right now where you're feeling like people are not giving you what you need. It's a really good time to take stock of that and say, what can I give myself? I'm mindful of the time, so I better hurry up. The third part is universality. Universality is recognizing I am not the first nor the last person to feel this. So it's recognizing in this moment in the world right now, many, many people are feeling anxious, distressed, and powerful, just like I am. And then sending a prayer, a wish, a compassion. May we all feel safe. May we all feel understood. May we all feel peaceful. So we take our inner experience, we recognize it, we are kind to ourselves, we recognize our connection with others in the world, we send that compassion out to them. For me, this is a really transformational practice. Kristen Neff has a great website called selfcompassion.org. And so you can find more information there. Another thing is many of us are angry, and Thich Nhat Hanh is a beautiful image. Instead of our anger being something scary, think of your anger as a crying baby, and you want to pick it up and saying like, what is wrong? Right now, many of us, our anger is actually covering over feelings of vulnerability and uncertainty. We want to blame somebody for this circumstance, but the truth is we are all in one big boat. And that often we need to tend to the vulnerability or the sadness or the fear. And that quiets the crying baby of anger. One thing to say here is hopeless outrage, hopeless panic are bad for our mental health. So if you're getting stuck in hopeless rage, if you're getting stuck in hopeless panic, I want to encourage you to work with those. Recognize that it's a feeling, but it's not the truth, right? A feeling isn't necessarily the truth. One thing you can notice is it's a wave. It comes and it goes. Usually our feelings, even intense ones, don't last longer than 20 minutes. They'll come back, but they don't last like infinitely. The other thing you can do is if you're feeling despair, it's really important to find out what's one thing I can do, even if it's meditate, even if it's pray, even if it's offer a prayer for those who are right now on the front lines of this. That is something, right? So find the small thing that you can do and do it. As I said before, you want to water the seeds of determination as well as seeds of peace, joy, and connection. So for example, you want to be able to connect in your heart to the feeling of loving and being loved, calling to mind those people you love, calling to mind moments in your life you have felt loved, calling to mind your spiritual practice of feeling beloved in God's eyes or in God's hand. Like those moments can really awaken the sense of peace and connection in our hearts. It's also important if you're living with others, take the time to be intentional to deepen your emotional connection with them, really making the space to talk about how we're all doing and being sure that we're not just rehearsing all the threat messages we've received, but we're sharing like, today I felt vulnerable, today I felt strong. That's a really powerful way to connect with one another. It's also important to connect how we can, where many of us are physically separated. My 80-something-year-old parents are becoming Zoom masters. They're learning how to have family gatherings on Zoom. My sister remarked today that we've seen more of each other in the last couple of weeks via televideo than we maybe would have had personal gatherings. So making sure that you connect with people, video helps, the face helps to be seen more than texting. There is some research that says when somebody texts, we don't have the same brain response we do as if we have a face-to-face conversation. So something with video I recommend. Making sure that when you do get together, you talk about something other than the coronavirus is helpful. And then briefly, I want to cover some spiritual resources. So we need a refuge. This is a big situation. So we need a very big space in our hearts where we can touch our deep rootedness, whatever our core intentions. I want to be loving in the world, whatever our core beliefs and values are, that we have a moment to live out of those. So we need spiritual comfort, and we need something that helps make deeper meaning of the suffering we may be in touch with right now. I mean, for me, that's one of the images of crucifixion. Like, it's such a stark reminder that Jesus didn't get saved from suffering, but he found a way through it where it wasn't the final word. Something in your own spirituality, nobody can give this to you. You have to dig deeply and find out, what does it say to you right now that helps ground you in this time of suffering? I love the serenity prayer for this moment because it's so apt. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. I need to say that prayer every day. The other image I'll offer you if you're feeling overwhelmed by suffering is the Buddhists have this nice story about suffering being like a handful of salt. And if we pour it into a glass of water and try to drink it, it's unbearable. It's just too much. But if we took the same handful of salt and we threw it into a deep lake, no problem. It can absorb that and we can still drink fresh water. So we need much bigger arms to hold this, which is why I think sharing in community what's going on, but also having a very big image of the arms of God or the capacity of the Spirit, however you understand the things that are bigger than ourselves, to hold this so that you're not trying to hold it within. I'll also just end with a couple of mindfulness practices. So mindfulness is just the willingness to be present in the present moment. And it often is associated with meditation. And I'll tell you this, if you can ruminate, you can meditate. So it's not that you have to be perfect at it. All you have to do is try over and over to come back to your breath or the present moment through your footsteps, through your bite of food in your mouth, and really be there for it. So that's the idea. It allows us to just be here and quiet the mind. We really do need to pause. So we want to pause and pay attention, have a moment of rest. Ah, here I am in the present moment. If we had 5 minutes, we would do this practice, but you can do it on your own. It'll be in the slides that you get. But this little tiny practice is really helpful for those moments between things. Take 3 deep breaths and say, I want to come home to myself. Take 3 more breaths and just scan the tension in your body and release it. Take 3 breaths and notice the content of your mind and just invite your thoughts to rest. Take 3 breaths, notice your heart. What are you feeling? Recognize it and just let those feelings rest like on a pillow on your breath. And then 3 more breaths and open to the peaceful presence of God. And in those breaths, you can change everything. And sure, you're going to get stressed out 10 minutes after that, but that minute or 2 of peace, it matters. We can bank it. Other things we can do include cultivating gratitude and writing it down. Mindful walking is great for people who hate sitting meditation. It just means every time you put your foot on the earth, let yourself really arrive there. Let your whole attention be on that and really let the earth support you in this difficult time. I also really like the idea of mindful eating because it connects me, especially if I'm feeling isolated, like, oh, this piece of corn grew in the earth with rain and sunshine and somebody harvested and brought it to me, like all of that just so I can eat it. It's pretty terrific. So we can feel taken care of in the way that we eat mindfully. All of these are little techniques that you can use to kind of sprinkle them through your day and see how do they change how you feel. I also think it's really important for us to check out our replenishing activities, like physically, creatively, socially, spiritually. What are things that when you do them, you love it and you really enjoy it? And which of those can you do in social distancing or self-isolation? If you really like dancing, that might have to wait. But maybe you can dance by yourself in a room where nobody's watching. These are the kinds of things that can help you. Now, I do want to say for some of us, we struggle with at times with anxiety and depression. If you notice your own symptoms are getting worse, or if you notice that coping mechanisms you're using are turning into trouble, like too much drinking or something like that, really don't be afraid to ask for help. There are supportive therapists out there, and take inventory. If you're using all these tools I'm offering and you're still really flat for a week or two, ask for some help. If you notice you can't sleep through the night, day in and day out, and your sleep is getting worse and worse, ask for some help. If the problem gets worse, get some help, because there's no gold medals for getting through this without support. We all need each other right now. And so everything that you can do to take in supports, to do your own practices, but to let other people help you will be of benefit. So I hope that this has been helpful. I'm sorry I talked a little longer than I meant to, but I'm still willing to hang out for a time for questions. I think that Katie and Katie are going to curate those questions, so I'm going to turn over to them to ask what might have come through. Hi.
Thank you, Kathy. That was so helpful. I gained so much from that. If anybody has questions, please do type them in. We'll receive them and ask them as they come in. And while that's happening, I was wondering, Kathy, if you'd talk a little bit about, the challenge of like this social isolation, and if somebody does feel like they need professional help, how would you recommend they go about it when it's maybe not the best time to go actually see somebody in person?
That's correct. I and most of the people I know are doing telehealth therapy, and so that's really good news for folks who are, especially in maybe more remote areas. You can, if you're domestic, you can check out Psychology Today. You can talk to your program directors who typically know some people who are sensitive to the kind of volunteer work that you're doing. And telehealth isn't like, it's not the same as being in the room with somebody, but it's pretty darn good if you have a good internet connection. So those are the things that I would recommend.
Great. All right. Well, still waiting for questions, but I have one of my own I can share. Um, I'm a mom. I have a 1-year-old, so I'm used to waking up a lot during the night, but I've been noticing that I'm staying up much longer, like having a hard time falling asleep, and just now connecting it to anxiety, I
Yes.
think, around this.
Correct.
So do you have any advice on what to do when you find yourself suddenly extremely alert in the middle of the night? How do you get back to sleep?
Yeah, that's a really, really great question. And I just want to say, right, especially for those of you who are moms who are used to having to respond to like, oh, that kind of extra boost of adrenaline from like, is everything okay, can make it hard to go back to sleep. So 2 things that I recommend and a couple of things I don't recommend. I don't recommend turning on your phone. I don't recommend just kind of scrolling until you fall asleep. What I do recommend is that you have a guided meditation handy. It could actually be on your phone, just don't look at the screen. And most of them, what make them effective is they focus on just resting. Like the first thing I would say is, oh, you're so awake. Just, you're safe right now. It's okay. And then breathing in and out, I'm going to just let my body rest. And if I don't fall asleep, I'll be tired tomorrow, but it's okay. The stress of trying to go to sleep often keeps people awake. Also, don't check the clock. Am I still awake? How late is it now? About now. That also tends to disrupt. And so just a state of acceptance. First, calming, I know I'm safe. And second, I'm gonna breathe in and out and I'm gonna let my body rest and see how it goes. Just so you take the pressure off yourself. I also think it's really helpful to say this is a perfectly normal reaction in these abnormal times.
Thanks, Kathy.
You're welcome.
I did have another question come in. How do you recommend managing stress or sadness for those of us who are still very busy working in our placements and don't have as much space to process and grieve the loss of our old normal?
Oh yeah, and I just, again, I want to say to you all, like, thank you. Thank you for what you're doing. And this is the self-compassion thing. Like, this is difficult. I would say to you though, be an advocate for yourself, and with your living situation, you need to take time for this. So even if it's only an extra 20 minutes in the morning and 20 minutes when you get home, take the time to inventory. How am I? How am I doing? What was hard today? What am I missing? What am I grieving? Because if you don't, if you just keep responding and responding to the needs around you, you're going to be quite depleted. And I really want for you to have the time to grieve that. So I know it might sound, I don't know, I'm not trying to be glib about it, but really be an advocate for carving out that time. Yeah. If you drive to and from work, just sit in the car for 10 extra minutes before you go in the house, for example.
Great. And then we did have another question. What kind of practices should we be sure to include in one day to make sure we're satisfying those 3 needs of safety, satisfaction, and connection?
Okay, so I actually think that my 3 top things is do something for your body every day. So whether it's exercise or whether it's attention reduction, make sure that you are working with your body every day. Make sure you're doing a 10-minute practice inventorying your mind and seeing, can you bring it back to a state of calm, either by writing down your worries or by focusing on gratitude. And then self-compassion every single day. Make sure that you take a minute and say to yourself, like, oh, of course, like, that was a hard moment for you. I hope you feel well. Yeah, a lot of people at work today felt frantic. May we all be well. Those are the 3 that I would do. But on the safety, connection, and satisfaction, I would say that noticing that you're all right now or taking a concrete step to become all right now, taking one step to feel connected to another person, and then make sure that you reflect in the day, one thing that made this day a day I was glad to live. That's a real way to touch base with contentment. Great questions, by the way. Thank you for those.
I see a new one here, and maybe the three of us can all respond to this. We'll see. Any recommendations to continue to get the most out of our service years and live in intentional communities, especially for those of us that were sent back home but are still trying to connect to what we had signed up for but are now doing it remotely?
You guys have something that come to the top of mind?
Well, I just wanted to acknowledge that it's always very difficult to leave your service here. For so many, it feels like things really get going and then it's over, and there's grief at the end of that experience anyway. And now to have it come potentially to an end, or at least a long lull so abruptly, is very unusual and very difficult. So I wanted to acknowledge that what you're going through is unique. And also the challenge of kind of going back home and not really having something new to immerse yourself in is another struggle. So I hate to respond with check out another webinar, but we are having a session on Thursday about reentry and about like ending your time and looking forward to what's coming. And that'll be facilitated by Kelly Nelson, who's the director of From Mission to Mission. And that's really a major focus of that organization. So we'll send you that information in a follow-up webinar. So I didn't give you anything to work with right now, other than acknowledging the reality.
I do. Actually, I think you did really nicely, which is the thing that you're highlighting that I think is at the heart of this question, which is sometimes it is accepting that there isn't a way to stay as connected to the program that you've left, that you're trying to work at remotely. Like, really, sometimes trying to maintain things as if it's all normal is more stressful than grieving letting it go. So I think that working with your program director in a skillful way around figuring out, is this a moment to persist in connecting, or is it a moment to let go? Like, I'm thinking about all the kids who are, graduating high school this year, and how hard it is to say, like, oh, that thing that everybody talks about that they got to do, you're not going to get that. You should grieve that. That's sad. And it's better, I think, to recognize when something's inevitably come to a close, unavoidably come to a close, than try to hang on to something that's not going to go back to normal. So for each of you, I think that that's part of the decision-making tree.
And the last thing I'll add to that is part of that grieving process, perhaps, and I think Kelly will speak more to this next week too, can be eliciting those feelings of when you felt really connected, or like remembering what you have really appreciated about your service year, and mourning that, but also celebrating it. And it might provide some guidance as to, you might not be able to have those things in the exact same way, but those are values or experiences or ways of connecting and being that you want to continue to cultivate in the future, and that they can come up in a new way. But part of that is, just the honoring of them first.
Yeah. And the other part that I think it lays bare, like, here's the thing that our brain does. Our brain creates continuity. So I think that I can plan my life a year from now, and I do it all the time. I commit to a workshop next November, and I'm like, yeah, I got that. And the truth is, I have no idea if I get to do that. I don't know if I will be well. I don't know if there's a pandemic. So we often guard ourselves against vulnerability by imagining continuity, and it's jarring to have something like this really lay bare, like, we just don't know. And for me, the spiritual practice of working with uncertainty of the future, what it helps me do is actually be grateful for the moment. But it's a steep climb. To say it any other way would be, I think, false. Like, it takes really feeling what you feel about this, but also understanding, what did it teach you? to have something you were so sure of taken away by circumstances beyond your control? What does it teach us about acceptance, and what does it teach us about our own capacity to respond to difficult circumstances? Which we're all learning. I'm in this boat too, by the way. if I'm talking like, oh, I can tell you all about this, but I don't have to do it, like that would be a lie. I'm working with all of these every day as well, as my life has changed. This is my, this is my room at home. This is not my nice office. We're all in this together. And I will say this, that often the blame and the frustration can arise, feeling like, how could you let this happen? But I think it's also the opportunity to cultivate the compassion of everybody is really trying to do their best in uncertain circumstances. And it may require things that you were sure you're going to hang on to, letting go of them. Or there might be something that you were sure you'd have to let go of that you find some way to hang on to. That's your discovery, I guess. That's something you'll know. So, do we have any other questions?
One last thought, maybe this could be a whole nother webinar, but just a few ideas around managing boundaries and how to, not only we're navigating our own states, but our friends, our community members, maybe virtually, like family, people afar coming at us on different levels, how to kind of go about that.
Boy, oh boy, that's a good question. I have to think about that. I do think that it's so hard. I think that structure is really good for us. So I think to go from high structure of work expectations to nothing, it can trip us up. But it's also real that if you're sharing a house with your extended family, like you don't get to work the way you used to work. And so it's some process of talking it through with people, like, here's what I'm needing. Is this possible? Like to hold our to be willing to assert them, but also hold it lightly, to be able to kind of structure in your own mind, when is my social time? But also realizing like maybe it doesn't have to be after 5 because I always work till 5. Like maybe you take breaks in the day now that wasn't possible before, and just be willing to be flexible with it. So I think this is really not one of my better answers, but I think it is. I think it's being willing to speak about it, being willing to dialogue about it, and having some structure in your own mind. Otherwise, we have an experience of frustration, and our temptation is to be like, you're causing this frustration by interrupting me. And maybe there's time to think like, okay, what is it about that interruption? What about it is real, is the new normal, the new abnormal? What about it is optional? And I really need you to know that even though I'm in the next room, I'm working, like, and have a dialogue about it without blame, I think, is the hard part. In communities, I just want to say to you, you guys who are still living in community, I'm guessing you're encountering all new challenges about how to relate to one another, about setting up new expectations and new normals. And if you're experiencing a lot of frustration or friction, breathe with that and realize, like, again, a perfectly normal reaction to a perfectly abnormal situation, and hang in there.
Yeah, so I heard some advice that I come back to many times a day, that this is temporary, and so we don't really have to figure out how to do it perfectly because it's temporary. So like, be forgiving of yourself if you're not great at working from home or being around your parents or your community members 24 hours a day. Like, be forgiving with yourself and with each other, because it's nothing anybody chose. It's, you know, a temporary situation, and you don't have to perfect it.
Really good point. You don't have to perfect it, and it's not permanent. You just have to deal with it and learn what you can. And so, I'm learning a lot about myself in what's hard and what's easy about this. I mean, it's really interesting. And so to take a frustration and say, yes, I wish you would stop doing that, but what am I learning about myself? Oh, I'm learning that predictability is kind of my way of maintaining control in this uncontrollable time. Or, oh, I'm learning that I just need some downtime where no one's talking to me every day. Okay. Like things that we can learn about ourselves in this moment are unusual because we're not usually in this kind of difficult thing. I would also say on Katie's point that trying to do it perfectly in a situation you didn't ask for and you've never done and there are really no roadmaps for is adding stress that is optional. And I really, really encourage us to jettison any optional stress that we do not need. And so perfectionism in this particular moment is definitely in that category.
Yeah. Amen.
All right. So what do we think?
So
Are we drawn to a close?
I think so,
I
yeah.
think so, yeah. But we invite everyone to continue to dialogue with us, and we do have that short survey that you'll get. It's only 3 questions as soon as you close out the browser, but you can tell us what more you'd like to see. If there's a specific topic or area that you'd like more support around, we can try to make that happen for you. So we are available, and we're grateful to everyone who took some time to be with us this evening.
Yes.
It's really comforting to know that we're all working on this together. So,
Yes.
and
Thanks again, Dr. Kathy.
Yeah, very much. Thank
So
you.
welcome. Happy to do it. And if there's anything that I can offer, if there are additional resources, let me know.
Thank you.
In the meantime, I hope all are well. And may you all be well, and may you feel loved and connected to those around you.
Thanks so much. All right, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.
Okay, bye.